But for about a week now, the situation on the city map hasn't really changed significantly at all. Can we say that right now, the task of Ukraine's defense forces is not so much to clear the city of enemy forces, but rather to ensure the logistics that run through the northern part of Pokrovsk, logistics for the defenders of Myrnohrad and the units located to the southeast of Pokrovsk?
Actually, I'll start by saying that the objectives currently being pursued by the armed forces of the Russian Federation have not changed for them. Their goal is to capture the entire city of Pokrovsk. It's clear that the logistics set up by the Russians through the southern portal, in particular, that's how they entered the city. We're talking about the southern part of Pokrovsk. Their logistical route is shorter than ours, the Ukrainians. And accordingly, this gives them certain advantages in supplying their troops, who continue to assault the positions of Ukraine's defense forces in Pokrovsk. On the other hand, we're talking about the fact that today those gray zones that have formed in the central part of the city, and not only there, because we have evidence that even in the southern part of Pokrovsk, which is currently controlled by the Russians, our units are also present and are conducting successful combat operations. Wearing down Russian units, preventing them from developing the very logistics we've been talking about. Accordingly, the Russians are trying to break through the gray zone and reach the city center. And obviously some sabotage and reconnaissance groups are already trying to move through the northern part of Pokrovsk in order to carry out their combat missions. So far, they have not succeeded in this. But the battle of logistics is truly coming to the forefront today. And in fact, the Russians continue to try to break through to the main logistics route. This is in the area in the direction of the settlement of Grishino, which is very important for us. Accordingly, the defense forces are also trying to counteract the enemy as much as possible so that this logistical artery is not completely cut off. Although today we can already see that the Ukrainian defense forces have created, let's say, alternative routes. These routes make it possible, among other things, to supply Myrnograd. Accordingly, with the resources that allow combat operations to continue. Despite the fact that, unfortunately, the Russians have made certain advances in Pokrovsk today, we have been saying for several days now that the situation has not changed dramatically. Russia is trying to put pressure on the defense forces and accordingly on our defensive lines. They haven't gone anywhere, they remain in place. The defensive operation continues, as does the special operation of our special forces. This includes the main intelligence directorate, the special operations forces, and accordingly the special units of the Security Service of Ukraine, which, among other things, provide logistics for Myrnohrad and at the same time destroy Russian troops and their logistics in the northern part and north of Pokrovsk. So as of today, the situation is developing according to a, let's say, relatively neutral scenario, though that may not be the most precise term. In other words, as of today, the scales are not tipping in anyone's favor. Let's put it that way. There's no movement starting in either direction. So accordingly, in my opinion, this scenario is not the worst one we could have faced. This means that the decisions made regarding Pokrovsk are currently being implemented and they are being carried out by our defense forces, by our soldiers at a high level. Of course, we are saying that things aren't so simple for the Russians. There are probably certain points I won't comment on today. But based on the movements the Russians are showing on the battlefield, and the tasks that our units can and most likely will carry out, the situation could change. Let me just leave it at that for now and say that in the near future, although for Ukrainians, of course, our main priority remains to preserve the combat capability, the maximum combat capability of our troops, and if necessary, to move to positions that will ensure the safety of our comrades' lives at this section of the front. That's why various scenarios are being considered, but the defensive operation near Pokrovsk continues.
Serhiy, that's a very intriguing situation. Of course, we will keep following the situation and this direction closely. Let's also discuss the southern direction since Russian troops continue to attack the positions of Ukraine's defense forces there, even though they are also suffering heavy losses both in personnel and equipment. This was reported by the spokesperson for the Southern Defense Forces, Vladislav Voloshin. According to his information, just today, Russia has lost 317 soldiers in this direction. Voloshin also noted that over the past week, the Russian army lost 1,363 servicemen in this direction. Ukrainian forces are also destroying Russian equipment. This week, for example, 3 tanks, 5 armored vehicles, a Uragan system, and even several Russian air defense systems were destroyed. There's a lot of information coming from there, but still, how are the battles unfolding? How is the Russian army advancing? And what is the situation like there?
As for the destruction of air defense elements, we've somehow gotten used to the fact that when it comes to the destruction of relevant anti-aircraft missile systems and air defense elements of the Russian Federation, it's usually somewhere on temporarily occupied territory or even on the territory of the Russian Federation itself. But today, as you can see from the reports of our agencies that are part of the defense forces, there really has been the destruction of such elements. Air defense elements are indeed being destroyed, including in the frontline zone. The main task of such systems is to protect the troops from aerial attacks by Ukraine. Accordingly, if such systems are destroyed on the ground, everything becomes very simple. The logic is straightforward and ironclad. Then it will be easier for our drones, our unmanned aerial vehicles, to fly to various positions in order to carry out various tasks. But first and foremost, these are tasks involving strikes not only against enemy fortifications, but also against locations where enemy personnel are concentrated. Naturally, this means striking at concentrations of enemy forces or at individual targets such as armored vehicles, specifically armored combat vehicles and tanks that are, for example, preparing to advance, or those same tanks being used as artillery systems. In other words, this work is ongoing today. We can see that, including in Donbass, our ghosts have worked very effectively. This is a structural unit of the main intelligence directorate, which until recently reported on its work and very successfully, specifically against air defense elements, but only in Crimea. Now, accordingly, part of this unit is in Donbass, performing the same functions. In other words, everything works together, and as we can see, there are no trivialities at the front. Everything is important, and all these pieces come together to form a certain picture, like a puzzle. Accordingly, delivering such strikes can, in one way or another, influence the outcome of the battle. That is, it can reduce the intensity of combat operations. Accordingly, these strikes also target, for example, command posts, which is happening, by the way, in the Zaporizhzhia direction, as well as in the Kherson and Pridniprovsk directions. In other words, operations are being carried out on the frontline territories. At present, this work is extremely important for the defense forces. Naturally, this affects the front in one way or another. That's why everything is important. Strikes are being carried out, and accordingly, this has already become systematic work. It's not just rear targets, not just substations, although this is also happening today in the temporarily occupied territories. Again, this is because an air corridor is being paved for our drones, which then operate more effectively. Accordingly, today we see videos, you are showing them, including footage of the destruction of Russian air defense systems operating near the front line.
Let's talk for a moment about another city that President Putin surrounded, together with Pokrovsk, just about 2 weeks ago.
Now, at this very moment,
in the Kupiansk direction, the operation to eliminate Russian units located in the northern part of the city continues. This was reported on the Yedini Novini marathon broadcast by Viktor Trehubov, head of communications for the Joint Forces Group. So, according to his information, the occupiers are trying to create the appearance of a presence in the city by hanging Russian flags to supposedly show control over the territory. And according to Trehubov, any attempts by the Russians to establish supplies in Kupiansk or to send reinforcements there are being thwarted by Ukrainian military drone strikes. Even the military report that the supply of Russian troops is carried out exclusively by drones as well. And in these little packages that are dropped from the sky, they actually include Russian tricolor flags. And our military say that this is actually a very good thing. They hang up their tricolor flags and in a way signal to the defense forces where to direct their strikes. And according to the latest information, maybe you can correct me, the situation in the city is more or less under control by the Ukrainian defense forces.
Actually, regarding those packages, I'd like to add that besides the tricolor, they should also be sending black body bags. That's actually very relevant today. As for the enemy's logistics in Kupiansk, it really is a tough issue for them right now. That's absolutely true. As for trends or these kinds of flash mobs like planting flags, the enemy is using the same tactics today. This was demonstrated, for example, in the Huliaipol direction. There too, the Russians are trying to hang up their tricolor rags in those ruins. Not ones they capture, but the ones we leave behind for tactical reasons because the fortifications are destroyed. Obviously, this is a good, let's say, little trick for our spotters, who then adjust the fire accordingly, and these strikes are delivered against Russian personnel. Returning to Kupiansk, the situation as of today, well, to put it very cautiously and with great care, is, at this point in time, far from positive for the Russians. At first glance, it might seem like we don't have any major successes there, although we do remember that just the other day the Russians were almost ready to bring one of the Putins there to show off that they had taken control of Kupiansk, that they had occupied it. You see, as of today, that story hasn't really gone any further. Even Kirienko didn't come, even though he was the one who initiated this kind of large-scale media and information psychological campaign. Accordingly, after the clearing operations, we do have some minor advances on the territory of Kupiansk. Today, there are locations where groups of Russian troops find it easier to surrender in order to save their own lives, and I hope that at least some of them will make such a wise decision at least once in their lives. The situation is far from fully resolved. Nevertheless, I want to be cautious in my assessments, because this concerns the security of the ongoing military operation. Accordingly, these are the current trends. Well, there are signs of such trends today, that the situation around Kupiansk is improving slightly. Therefore, we hope that, as we always say in such situations, the main thing is for everything we have planned to work out. The situation at the front is difficult. Neither here in your studio nor on our side is there any euphoria that everything is going our way. Unfortunately, far from everything is going well. But on the other hand, we don't really want to crawl into a cellar of despair either, let alone start shouting, betrayal, betrayal. It's hard. The front, the war. At the moment, the initiative for offensive actions is with the Russians. Yes, that's obvious. And it's clear why. Their infantry and aviation components today, unfortunately, far exceed our capabilities by several times. However, we have technology, we have weaponry,